Chapter 2. Between Two Fires. If you could travel back in time to witness a Beltane ritual in early medieval Ireland or Scotland, the image that would likely burn itself into your memory, quite literally, would be this. Cattle driven between two great fires, the flames roaring on either side, the animals wild-eyed and bellowing, smoke rising thick into the May morning, and the people gathered around, chanting, praying, willing those fires to do their protective work. This is the heart of Beltane, the core ritual, the image so powerful and so persistent that it appears in our earliest textual evidence and echoes through folklore collected more than 1,000 years later. Let's be clear about our sources here, because with something as old as Beltane, honesty about what we actually know is crucial. The earliest secure description comes from medieval Irish glossaries, learned compilations made by monks and scholars who were preserving and explaining their linguistic heritage. These weren't ritual instruction manuals. They were dictionaries, essentially, explaining old words and their meanings. But in explaining Beltane, they give us this: two fires made with incantations and cattle driven between them for protection. That's it. That's the textual anchor. Everything else is inference, later elaboration, or evidence from other time periods that we tentatively project backward. But that core image, two fires, cattle between, is solid. Why two fires specifically? We can speculate, and the speculation is probably sound, but we're still speculating. Two creates a passage, a threshold, a liminal space. To pass between is to cross something, to move from one state to another. The cattle entering from one side are winter cattle, weak, vulnerable, confined. The cattle emerging from the other side are summer cattle, purified, protected, ready for the upland pastures. The fires themselves would have been substantial. This wasn't a matter of lighting two small campfires and shooing the cattle between them. We're talking about bonfires, flames high enough to require careful management, hot enough that the cattle would resist passing between them, smoky enough that both animals and people would emerge coughing and stinking of wood smoke. And that smoke, that acrid, eye-watering smoke, was part of the point. Smoke purified. Smoke drove away harmful influences. Smoke marked you as having participated in the rite. For days afterward, your cattle would smell of Beltane fire, a lingering olfactory blessing. The fires were made with incantations, the early sources tell us. This is tantalizing and frustrating in equal measure. What were the words? What language? What deities or powers were being invoked? We don't know. The monks who recorded that incantations were used either didn't know the specific words themselves, or knew them but chose not to write them down, or wrote them down in manuscripts that haven't survived. But we can infer the general shape of what was happening. These weren't random words. They were powerful words, words that had to be spoken correctly to be effective, words that had been passed down, perhaps for generations, from those who knew how to do Beltane properly. Words that connected the present moment to all the previous Beltanes, creating a chain of tradition stretching back into a past that even then was becoming mythical. The fires likely weren't just made from any old wood, either. Fire-making could be ritualized, specific types of wood, kindled in specific ways, perhaps even using friction methods rather than convenient flame. Some later Scottish evidence suggests that the need fire made by friction of wood, laboriously, collectively, was considered especially powerful for protective purposes. Whether this was practiced in early medieval Ireland, we can't say with certainty, but the logic fits. And then the cattle themselves. Imagine being a cow or an ox in this scenario. You've spent the winter in close confinement, possibly sheltered in the same building as your human keepers, fed on diminishing stores of hay and grain. You're weak. You're probably lousy with parasites. You're certainly not at your sharpest. And now, these humans, whom you trust to a degree but also rightly fear, are driving you toward two massive fires that every animal instinct tells you to flee from. The cattle would resist. They would balk. They would try to turn back. It would take multiple people working together, shouting and pushing and maneuvering to force the animals through. The noise must have been tremendous. Cattle bellowing in fear, people shouting encouragement or commands, the roar and crackle of the fires, perhaps drums or other instruments being played to add to the ritual intensity.
Faster! Keep moving! Through the flames!
And through it all, the smell. Burning wood, yes, but also something else. In later descriptions from Scotland, we hear about specific herbs or plants being thrown onto the fires. Juniper was popular. Juniper smoke was considered cleansing, protective. Perhaps other local plants with medicinal or mystical associations. The smoke would have been complex, layered, thick with meaning. When a cow finally burst through to the other side, emerging from between the fires, she would be transformed. Not literally, of course. She was still the same animal, probably more stressed than before. But symbolically, ritually, she had been remade. The harmful influences that might have clung to her through winter, disease spirits, bad luck, the malevolent attention of predatory forces, both natural and supernatural, had been burned away. She was ready for summer, protected, blessed. And the humans? They likely passed between the fires as well, or at least exposed themselves to the smoke. The ritual wasn't just for the livestock. People needed protection too, from disease, from misfortune, from all the countless ways that life in a pre-modern world could suddenly, violently end. So they would position themselves where the smoke blew thick, breathing it in, letting it coat their skin and clothes, marking themselves as participants in the rite. There's something deeply ancient about fire as a purifying force. It appears across Indo-European cultures, across time periods, in contexts from funerary ritual to seasonal celebration. Fire transforms. Fire separates pure from impure. Fire drives back chaos and darkness. The Beltane Fires were tapping into something primal, something that spoke to human understanding long before the Gaels arrived in Ireland, let alone before Christianity arrived in the Gaelic world. But here's what's important. This wasn't symbolic in the modern sense, where we might say, oh, how nice, they had a ritual to make themselves feel better about moving their cattle. This was functional. These people genuinely believed, not in a vague, hopeful way, but with the certainty that comes from lived tradition and communal consensus, that the fires worked. That cattle driven between them really were protected. That failure to perform the rite would result in real, measurable harm. Disease outbreaks, attacks by predators, mysterious deaths. Was this belief true in an objective sense? That's the wrong question. The right question is, did it function? And the answer is clearly yes. It created community cohesion, everyone working together toward a common goal. It provided psychological reassurance during a genuinely dangerous transition. It formalized and solemnized an important moment in the agricultural year. It connected people to their ancestors and their traditions, creating continuity across generations. And who knows, maybe it helped the cattle too. Animals are sensitive to human emotional states. Cattle that went through the Beltane Fires, accompanied by confident, ritually focused humans, might well have fared better than cattle moved by anxious, uncertain handlers. The mechanism isn't mystical, but the outcome could be real nonetheless. The two fires of Beltane burned bright in the landscape and in the cultural imagination. They burned in early medieval Ireland. They burned in Scotland well into the modern era. And they burn still in different forms in the modern revivals and reinterpretations of Beltane that dot the contemporary calendar. The cattle pass between. The smoke rises. The summer begins. And the ancient rhythm continues in ways both recognizable and transformed.